We're going to next talk about wrapper classes, and just as a precursor to that, let's take a quick look at something that we've already been doing, right? So if I say integer dot parseInt, and if I jump up to the integer class, right? So that's really what I've done, right? These classes are allowing us to use an instance of the static integer, right? And use the method inside there simply by saying I need an integer. My point is that the wrapper class integer does a parseInt, right? Notice also, I'm going to leave that red line there for now because that's not what I want to focus on actually. What if I do double, parse double, right? So int is a primitive. Integer is a wrapper class that allows you to do certain things with an integer in the form of an object. Int is a primitive. Integer is an object. And what we said earlier was that these collections and lists and maps, they only take objects. Remember I did the example of I created the list and I tried to, in my generic brackets, I tried to put the primitive int, wouldn't let me do it. It specifically said you cannot use primitives in these collections. But we can use integers, okay? Double, all of the primitives have an associated wrapper class, okay? But if you think about it, without even going too deep into it, that could cause some problems, right? Because an int is not an object. An int is a primitive, but we're going to use it in an object. So what we're going to talk about is autoboxing and unboxing and how all of that will happen in the background for you, because we need to be able to translate the int to an integer and back and forth. Every primitive has an associated wrapper class, and we've already been using them when we do double.parseDouble or integer.parseInt. All right, so let's continue a little bit with these wrapper classes. And as I was saying, each primitive has an associated wrapper class. So what I would like to do next here in our miscellaneous project is let's go ahead and create let's do a new class. We'll call it Java class wrapper. We'll just call it wrappers, and then why don't we just call it wrapper tester. We'll put a main in here. All right, so like we were saying, let's go ahead and focus on the integer, the int primitive. And if I want to go ahead and do this, I can't do it. It's not going to allow me. So the option that I have instead of using the primitive is to use the wrapper. Okay? So now we have an acceptable array list of integer objects created. Okay? So let's do some things with the integer. Okay? If I wanted to create an integer variable, I can explicitly do that by calling the new keyword on integer. And what I mean by that is I can do integer, my integer equals new integer. And I can give that a specific integer. That would be the explicit way Okay, so that works. Another way to do that let's say I wanted to change that, and I go my integer equals, now I can go in also and use the integer object, use the dot operator, and I'm going to have a method in here called value of. Okay, and that's overloaded, right? We have two value of methods there. One takes a string, one takes an int. I'm going to use the int, and I'm going to go ahead and change that. Okay, now more often than not, you might see the new integer. Either one of these options are valid and can be done, but the beauty of it is that you don't have to do any of that, because the integer class and all of the wrapper classes do something called autoboxing. In other words, rather than you having to say integer.value of, that's you managing Java, right? When you really think about it, you shouldn't have to do that. You want to keep your focus on the logic and let Java do all these things in the background. So with autoboxing, I don't need to do either of those two explicit options. I can simply do my integer equals 55. And so autoboxing is saying that the autoboxing functionality that happens in the background is saying that I know that I want to allow an int into this integer object, and it's going to take care of all of that in the background. So you can treat the integer, you can treat the int and the integer object really just like an int for the most part, because Java is intelligent enough to take care of the things that need to happen for that to work. In the background, it takes care of all that. Okay, now that would be taking the int and putting it into the integer. Let's take the reverse side, okay? So the first way, this is all autoboxing up here. All right, so now let's take a look at this and do some unboxing. So what I mean by going the reverse route, what if I want to create an int primitive and I want to assign my integer value, which is an integer wrapper class version. Okay, so I can do that, and all is taken care of in the background. So the idea is, if someone asks you about autoboxing, that's if you want to take the primitive and move it into the integer variable that you created, and the unboxing would happen when you do the flip side. You want to take the integer wrapper class value and put that into a primitive int. Java will take care of all of that for you. Autoboxing, primitive to the wrapper, unboxing, wrapper to the integer, or the int, I should say. Okay, so back to our explanation up here about why this is important to us, and that is because these collections, these list collections, only take objects. Our integer wrapper class is that object, which is going to allow us to do some things with ints, okay? So we have an int created here, which is my integer set up here, right? So let's see if we can actually utilize the autoboxing and the unboxing in the list itself. So up at the top, I have created the numbers array list of integers. So what I can do now is I can say, what did I call that list? I called it numbers. Okay? What if I want to go ahead and add doesn't seem to be a problem, right? What am I doing here? What am I adding? my integer is of data type, and I'll just jump to it. It's of data type integer wrapper class. So that's one way. I can take the integer version of my number and put it into my integer array list, and I can also, what if I want to add my primitive? That will also work. And my primitive is defined as a primitive int. So if